Now, the actual global espionage scandal is the one we're going to talk about next. And this is the latest wrinkle. JPMorgan decides that it is going to settle with the Virgin Islands over its relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Just scandalous beginning to end. We have JPMorgan getting asked about this most unfortunate connection that they had to Jeffrey Epstein. Let's play Diamond here.
How are you feeling about the Epstein deposition this month?
I am so sad that we had any relation with that man whatsoever. You know, we had top lawyers evaluating this from the SEC enforcement, the DOJ. You know, and obviously, had we known then what we know today, we would have done things differently. But it's very unfortunate, and I have deep respect for these women. That doesn't mean we're liable for the action of an individual, but I do have deep respect for them. My heart goes out to them, and.
He's always so tan. Brian, that's from about 4 months ago. So they were asking about the deposition that month of Jamie Dimon and other executives at JPMorgan.
Good reason to settle.
One thing he said,
settle this thing.
Yeah. So one thing he said right there that was interesting. He said, obviously, if we had known then what we know today, we wouldn't have had this business arrangement with Jeffrey Epstein. But of course, that's part of the problem here, is that JPMorgan did have indications. They did know. And this is one of the biggest remaining questions, and it's not even a question in many cases, why people, Bill Gates included, continued to have relationships with business, personal, Jeffrey Epstein after he got that sweetheart plea deal down in Florida that, at the very least, exposed him as a predator. That's the problem, and that's not, nobody has a good answer to that question. Not Bill Gates, not JPMorgan, which is where you get the $75 million settlement. And actually, it's worth noting, that's the same amount that Deutsche Bank agreed to pay Epstein victims. I'm actually reading from CNBC here, to settle a third Manhattan federal court lawsuit that alleged the bank facilitated his sex trafficking when he was a customer from 2013 through 2018. So look at those years, pretty important. Now, the CNBC report also notes the deals come months after a separate $290 million settlement by JPMorgan with victims of the now dead predators. The Virgin Islands previously obtained a $105 million settlement for Epstein's estate and another $62 million from billionaire investor Leon Black to resolve potential claims related to Epstein. Now, this money from JPMorgan is going to attorney's fees for the Virgin Islands and what they describe as infrastructure to help them with sex trafficking and victims and all of that. Man, for JPMorgan, $75 million, not a huge amount. For Deutsche Bank, $75 million, not a huge amount, especially when they're doing okay right now. But when you add that to the $290 million that they had to give to the victims, that's stacked up. That's a costly error, obviously.
Yeah. I'm sure they probably still made money
beyond the
off.
money, of course, is what I was alluding to.
Right, but they probably still made money off of it in the end.
Absolutely.
And there's the incentives here are for these, banks who work with these massively rich people to just look the other way. Yeah. And it's so arcane and opaque that it's this constant cat and mouse game between regulators and the banks, and the cats are tiny, the mice are huge. It's just, and they're just hunting in the dark. It says, JPMorgan did not admit any wrongdoing in the settlement, which will give $55 million to Virginia Islands charities and the American territories' anti-trafficking efforts. It says the Virginia Islands said the deal, quote, includes several substantial commitments by JPMorgan Chase to identify, report, and cut off support for potential human trafficking, including establishing and implementing comprehensive policies and procedures, unquote. That's the good. That's the hard part. And also they don't want to do it.
Right.
So yeah, they just have to constantly be exposed and pressured. Otherwise, their incentive is to just allow their clients to just move money, in whatever way they feel like they can get away with.
Yes, and yeah, it becomes the tax of doing business. It's like a fee, right? Like you're going to have to pay some settlement down the road if it turns out that this guy you have really good indications might be a sex trafficker, is sex trafficking, and you're facilitating it. I think it's actually the case itself is actually a pretty interesting test of liability and the law regarding liability and bank liability. But it's very, very clear that the relationship top executives at JPMorgan had with Jeffrey Epstein was wildly inappropriate. The legality of it is obviously a different question, but they are one of many organizations and people who continue to do business with him and continue to have personal business with him beyond when it was appropriate, including, by the way, the Virgin Islands, which is another interesting layer in the story. Lee Fong has done excellent reporting on this. This is a headline from Lee in August. Fired AG leading Epstein inquiry reveals the Virgin Islands governor pressured her on pedophile's behalf. His subheading is newly filed court documents show that the Virgin Islands Attorney General investigating Epstein faced political pressure to give the pedophile a special waiver. He needed a special waiver in the Virgin Islands, and he got it. And it looks as though he was lavishing people in the Virgin Islands with donations and political donations, all kinds of stuff in order to get the treatment that he needed to be doing business down there. And so it's not just JPMorgan that was complicit. And so the settlement with the Virgin Islands is interesting because there's more and more reporting coming out that a lot of people in the Virgin Islands seem to be compromised beyond beyond sort of normal ethics with Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, good point. Like, it's definitely not only JPMorgan. And if you're even going to sympathize with JPMorgan for a second, you're going to say, from JPMorgan's perspective, you're going to say, wait a minute, this guy's hanging out with former presidents, former prime ministers, members of the royal family. Everybody's talking about how he's like an intelligence asset for maybe multiple countries.
Yep.
Of course we're doing business with him. And now all of a sudden we're not supposed to do business with friends of presidents who are intelligence assets? We're JPMorgan Chase. It's your fault for letting all of this unravel.
Right. And I mean, I think that's another thing is these settlements are preventing some exposure probably of why people felt pressured or beyond money because places like JPMorgan have plenty of money. Their reason for doing business with Jeffrey Epstein might be different than Virgin Islands, people in the Virgin Islands, government officials, sort of petty bureaucrats' reasons to do business with Jeffrey Epstein. And the intelligence ties are probably the biggest missing puzzle piece. And it's not entirely missing. We have some good reporting that Jeffrey Epstein was Mossad, was affiliated with Mossad. So there's plenty to that, and I think there's probably some explanation, partially an explanation for why we saw so many powerful people continue to have relationships with him when they did. But this is, again, the cost of doing business. If you're JPMorgan, might just be a fat legal settlement down the road. And to your point, Ryan, I'd love to know if they still came out on top, because I think there's a good chance when Epstein was moving as much money as he was, that they did.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.